The studio air grows denser as the silence stretches, the red recording light on the main camera blinking in rhythm with the viewer's tightening chests. No music, no transition, just that still, focused silence as Ibrahim Traoré holds the lens with his gaze, a gaze not of defiance, but of unshaken sorrow. It was the same kind of silence that once settled over refugee camps in Ouagadougou after another mining contract erased a village. The same kind that followed reports marked under review by Western embassies. In this moment, the audience doesn't realize they're no longer watching a television show, they're watching history stare back at them. And when Samuel tries to break the quiet with another smirk, it doesn't land. Something has shifted. There's a flicker of unease behind his eyes. The power dynamic has quietly inverted, and it is visible in the way Samuel's voice trembles slightly as he signals the next segment, though the control room hasn't yet fed him new prompts. Backstage, a producer whispers, "This wasn't in the prep notes," but the camera doesn't cut. The narration winds through the soundproofed walls and out into the world. Across cities, living rooms, and mobile phones, people begin streaming the broadcast, drawn not by celebrity, but by a stillness that unnerves. On a university campus in Dakar, a professor pauses mid-lecture as students huddle around a laptop. In Paris, a former diplomat lowers her glass of wine mid-sip. In Atlanta, a nurse on break rewinds the moment Ibrahim said nothing and felt louder than anything ever shouted on that stage, because sometimes silence isn't absence, it's evidence. The next scene stays fixed in the same moment, becoming heavy. The camera slowly closes in on Samuel's face. He is no stranger to confrontation. His career has been built on fiery delivery and unfiltered opinion. But something about Ibrahim's restraint doesn't fit the rhythm of Western debate. He realizes it's not performance. Ibrahim's presence doesn't demand respect, it radiates it. And that disorients the host. Narration carries the weight of what words cannot. The audience is shown Ibrahim's eyes that once watched bulldozers tear through his childhood street in Bobo Dioulasso under international security contracts. The same eyes that saw his uncle, a teacher, dragged away after protesting foreign interference in Burkina Faso's schools. Those eyes have not changed, but they have seen enough to stop chasing applause. Samuel shifts in his seat and forces a laugh to thaw the ice. "You're good at theater, I'll give you that." A few audience members chuckle, unsure if they should, but Ibrahim doesn't react. Not to the jab, not to the chuckle. His stillness speaks louder than defense. And that's when the tide truly begins to turn. Outside the studio, the light counter ticks higher. Journalists scramble to frame headlines. Tense exchange on prime time. Some type, African leader turns interview into intervention, others suggest. But the truth is simpler. Ibrahim Traoré isn't performing, he's remembering. And the world is finally watching. Samuel clears his throat, leans forward, and tries again, more serious. "Now, tell me something real then. Why do you say the West must burn bridges to find justice?" There's a flicker, a moment when even he realizes the framing of the question is laced with irony. But it's too late. The words have left his mouth. Ibrahim shifts his eyes slowly, back to Samuel. His lips part, then close again. He blinks once. And just when it seems he might speak, he tilts his head. Not dismissively, but as if hearing the question differently than it was asked. The audience senses it too. The man they thought would raise his voice hasn't even raised his heartbeat. The silence lingers, not empty, but full of reckoning. And then, a sound that breaks the moment, not from the stage, but from the audience. A young woman in the second row exhales sharply. It's involuntary, emotional. The camera doesn't catch her face, but the mic does. Samuel hears it too. He pauses. And for the first time, the host looks less like an interrogator and more like a man who doesn't know what to say next. In this stillness, the narration rises again. It draws from the memories of a continent rarely heard beyond caricature. It paints the image of a boy walking home from school past French flags and fences he was told were there for his protection. It shows a young soldier writing by candlelight after a raid, recording names the newspapers never printed. It reminds the audience that Ibrahim's presence here isn't symbolic. It's a ledger finally being read aloud. The tension is no longer between two men. It's between truth and denial. Between performance and memory. Between what the world says it values and what it actually rewards. Ibrahim's face does not move. But his voice returns not as a reply, but as a reminder. Some bridges were never meant to be crossed again. His voice is soft, controlled, but it hits like stone on glass. No applause, no music cue. The show is no longer a show. It has become a mirror. The director whispers through the earpiece, "We have to go to break." Samuel nods subtly, but before they cut, he turns back toward Ibrahim, expecting a final word, a quip, or a counterpunch. But all he receives is silence. And then, for the first time in the entire episode, Samuel's face falls not in defeat, but in recognition, because he knows what the audience is realizing too. He wasn't hosting the interview. He was being taught one. The camera holds its frame a second longer than usual, long enough for people around the world to sit back, unsure what just happened but certain that something did, and then the screen fades to black. New outro music. New credits. Just one quiet frame. Ibrahim's face, unwavering, staring not at his opponent, but at all who were watching, waiting to see if they'd finally hear. Samuel's fingers twitch slightly as he watches the clip. A flicker of something unfamiliar crossing his face. Not performance, not anger, but discomfort. Real and raw. The video bleeds into the studio lights as Ibrahim turns toward it, his face unreadable. In the grainy footage, his mother collapses over a small pile of dirt, surrounded by scattered remains, bones barely covered, villagers erased by sanctioned airstrikes denied by officials. Her cries are not loud. They are quiet, guttural, exhausted, a sound that has no language. The studio is dead silent. Even the cameras seem to hesitate. Narration presses in with the weight of buried truths. Ibrahim's childhood unfolded under the drone of colonial aircraft. He learned to spell while tracing missing names on classroom walls, to read from censored newspapers that only told one side. Back then, justice wasn't something you saw. It was something you whispered about when the power went out and no one was listening. Samuel clears his throat, trying to regain footing. That's heartbreaking. But there's blood on your hands too, isn't there? Some say you're just another warlord in uniform. The words land heavy, but Ibrahim doesn't flinch. Instead, his voice lowers. I carry many names, but none were given to me by the people I buried. Narration cuts to a moment 2 years earlier, an abandoned French-run hospital in eastern Burkina Faso. Ibrahim, in plain clothes, kneeling beside an old woman missing her foot. She asks if the world will ever remember them. He replies, only if I refuse to forget. Then, a sharp edit to a room full of bureaucrats in Brussels, laughing over economic reports. The same month, an aid convoy is halted at a border crossing. No clearance, no explanation. Children waited. Some died. The camera returns to Samuel. He's listening now, but with less challenge and more reckoning. He leans forward not to attack, but to understand, though he won't admit it yet. Suddenly, a new video plays on the studio screen, one no one was expecting. It's not from Ibrahim. It's from a former UN logistics officer. Shaky phone footage. Voice indirect dialogue. We knew the blockade would starve them. We knew. But orders were orders, and silence paid better than outrage. A gasp from the audience. The story is shifting, not just morally, but structurally. Narration resumes, layering emotion through visual memory. A montage shows children drawing tanks instead of trees. Graves dug shallow because there weren't enough shovels. Men choosing between protesting or feeding their families with stolen grain. And within that darkness, a single image lingers. Ibrahim, at the funeral of his mentor, a priest shot dead for preaching about corporate interference. The only words spoken over his body were Ibrahim's. They turned justice into paperwork. Samuel tries once more to steer the conversation, but is confrontation the only answer? You talk about burning systems, but what happens after? Ibrahim glances up, his eyes sharp yet patient. You rebuild with different hands. The dialogue fades again. The narration zooms out to expose a wider network of complicity. Interviews surface with former soldiers who defected after seeing how foreign powers manipulated rebellions. A young woman, her village wiped out by a drone strike, describes holding her sister's necklace for 3 days before she found what remained of her. Her voice doesn't rise, it stays steady. That's what survival sounds like. Ibrahim's calm becomes louder with every denial exposed. The studio audience, once an eager crowd, now sits still, blinking, some with tears they don't acknowledge. A teacher watching from Kenya posts a live stream in a group chat with the caption, "Finally, someone said it." The narration reveals Samuel's shifting expressions not just as a reaction, but as a reflection of Western audiences slowly realizing they were not watching a scandal, they were watching receipts. Samuel sighs and stares at his clipboard. Words now useless. In the presence of this gravity, he speaks, softer now. You say silence is violence. But how do you make people care? Ibrahim responds, not with theory, but with ache. You remind them who's already buried. The power of that moment doesn't come from the line itself, but from the space that follows. A man who once shouted in films, now sits in stillness, absorbing a truth that refuses to blink. In the wings, the production team scrambles. We need to cut, one insists. Another replies, not yet. Something's happening. It's not outrage, it's recognition. The clip of Ibrahim's mother fades. The bones dissolve into ash. The screen behind them goes black. And from that darkness, a single quote appears. Written in Ibrahim's handwriting, we were not born poor, we were made poor. Samuel doesn't speak again immediately. Instead, he sets his cue cards down. Slowly, he looks at the screen, then at Ibrahim. What was supposed to be a confrontation has become an unmasking, not of Ibrahim, but of the system. The narration closes the section with a long breath of reflection. The audience is not applauding. They are not standing. They are sitting, facing the haunting question, what now? And just before the show moves to its next segment, Samuel lifts his head, visibly moved. His voice comes back not sharp, but sincere. I have one more question. The lights shift. The music stays off. This time the room leans forward with him. The cameras remain fixed on the table. the small vial of red dirt now commanding more presence than the microphones ever could. It sits motionless, yet carries centuries of movement of plundered earth, displaced families, and silenced memories. The stage feels colder now, emptier, though both men had only just stood there seconds ago. The audience doesn't clap. They don't move. It's not out of confusion, it's reverence, the kind that rises when performance ends and revelation begins. Samuel sits back, fingers still wrapped around each other like he's gripping a past he no longer trusts. His face has lost its practiced composure. Something inside him is cracking, quietly, painfully. Narration shifts inward, carrying us not into Ibrahim's mind this time, but Samuel's, into corridors of memory he'd shut tight with success and spotlight. The trip to Ghana had been one of many, a photo op, a cause, a moment where empathy felt convenient. The boy in the dust had drawn a tree with broken branches. Samuel had smiled, handed him a $5 bill, and told himself he did something good. But now, under the weight of Ibrahim's words, that memory turns to accusation, not because anyone said it was wrong, but because he knows he forgot. Narrator, it is one thing to care in moments, it is another to carry them when no one is watching. Samuel reaches toward the vial but doesn't touch it. His fingers hover like they're afraid of what acknowledgement might cost. In the control room, the producers exchange looks unsure if this segment should be cut, paused, or let run. One voice finally says, "Let it breathe." Backstage, Ibrahim waits alone, not pacing, not checking a phone, just standing, watching. The studio monitors in silence. He knows the battle isn't on screen anymore. It's in the silences now, in the corners of minds where justification once lived. His part is done. Back on stage, Samuel speaks again, but this time without tone or tempo, just truth. "You said something earlier, about the chair built by chains." He looks out at the audience, but it's unclear if he's addressing them, or himself. "I never thought about that. That the comfort we inherit might come from someone else's absence." Narration returns to the audience, now eyes wide, some blinking back tears, others gripping armrests. A teenager records a snippet on his phone, but halfway through, he lowers it. Some moments don't need reposting, they need remembering. Studio screen changes again, unprompted. A looped video, villagers in Kumasi, walking barefoot across cracked ground, carrying buckets, their silhouettes framed by mining machinery in the distance. No voiceover, no captions. Just the raw noise of drills and wind and the occasional cough of a child too young to understand what lithium was. Samuel rises slowly from his seat, as if gravity now resists him differently. He approaches the vial and kneels, not as a gesture for television but because something inside him folds. He places one hand on the table near the dirt, never touching it directly, but lowering his gaze to its level. A murmur stirs in the crowd. The lights don't change. The cameras don't cut. The stillness speaks. Ibrahim re-enters without being called. He walks not to his chair, but beside Samuel. For a long second, they stand side by side, not as host and guest, but as two men in the same reckoning. Ibrahim doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His presence alone now delivers truth more efficiently than any speech could. Narration now reflects the world outside. Across cities, newspapers change headlines. Comment sections go quiet. In Ouagadougou, a young man texts his mother. He didn't bow, but they listened. A retired colonel in London turns off his television mid-sentence and stares out the window. An NGO worker rereads an old report they never submitted. Samuel finally breaks the silence, not to defend, but to confess. "I never knew that boy, back then. He drew a broken tree. I told him to keep drawing. I didn't ask his name. I never looked for him again." His voice breaks, and not just from emotion, but shame. "I told myself I was doing enough, but I left too soon." Ibrahim listens, face steady, not moved by the apology, but by the moment. He understands what this is. Not atonement, awakening. He finally replies, "We don't need guilt. We need memory." Samuel nods slowly, taking the weight of that line like a man realizing he's been walking with someone else's shadow across his back his whole life. Then comes the unexpected. A man in the third row, dirty suit pressed, glasses in hand, stands up. He doesn't speak, he just stands. A moment later, a woman behind him rises too. Then another. The cameras pan slowly, capturing it. People standing, not applauding, not cheering, just standing. In recognition, in respect, in reckoning. Samuel turns toward Ibrahim one last time. "If I let this air as it happened, will it matter? Ibrahim, if even one child grows up in light instead of silence, yes." The control room confirms. The episode will air, uncut, commercial-free, not as a show, but as a document. And then, Samuel does something that surprises even him. He picks up the vial. Not to claim it, but to carry it to the audience, to the camera, to the world. As the lights dim and the credits roll wordlessly, narration leaves one final echo. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it enters the room, uninvited, and dares us to listen. The screen fades not to black, but to the red soil of Kumasi, silent, still, waiting to be remembered. Narration slows. It's weeks later, a wide shot of Samuel's home office. He's staring at a photo, an old trip to West Africa. He zooms in on a child in the background, smiling, barefoot, holding a twig. The same child he once gave $5 to. The same child whose eyes now haunt him, because they're the same eyes he saw in Ibrahim. His fingers tremble slightly as he sets the photograph down. The screen fades into news footage. Headlines stream across. Samuel Jackson launches educational trust in Burkina Faso. Former host's unexpected transformation inspires global movement. The man who once mocked, now builds. Social media has gone silent. But one post remains. A simple photo of the red dirt vial. The caption reads, "I started listening. No hashtags, no tags. Just the dirt and the silence that followed." Meanwhile, Ibrahim returns home. There is no crowd waiting at the airport, no red carpet, no flashing lights, only the dry wind and the sun overhead. He walks alone through a quiet path leading to a small, neglected grave. Khalifa's. He kneels, dusts off the stone with his sleeve, and lays down a folded flag, not a national one, but the flag Khalifa once drew in class with crayon. A bird flying over water. The wind carries the dust gently over Ibrahim's boots. As he stands in silence, no tears, just stillness. Narration reflects slowly. Justice is not thunder. It's the quiet after the storm, when the earth begins to breathe again. Across social media, the clip of Ibrahim placing the dirt vial on the studio desk has been watched over 100 million times. Comment sections are filled with phrases like, "He didn't yell, but I felt it in my bones. And this changed how I see everything." Hashtags like #listen to Ibrahim and hashtag justice in silence trend for weeks. The phrase "you speak of freedom from a chair built by chains" becomes a rallying cry at protests in Paris, Toronto, Nairobi, and Sao Paulo. Mural artists begin painting Ibrahim's silhouette on walls, not as a celebrity, but as a listener. Always listening. In New York, Samuel is invited on various media outlets but turns down almost every request. When he finally appears in one short interview, he doesn't justify himself. He doesn't try to rebrand. He simply says, "He didn't change my politics, he changed my lens." The host pauses, unsure how to follow, and the moment ends just like that, not with applause, but introspection. Then comes the quiet, poetic justice. A former French ambassador, who once oversaw extractive deals in West Africa, is subpoenaed by an international court. Emails surface. Whistleblowers come forward. A mining CEO quietly resigns days before a major expose airs. The world begins to crack, not loudly, but steadily. And with each shift, classrooms in Burkina Faso begin receiving laptops funded by anonymous donors. Girls who once studied by candlelight now open coding programs. A child, no older than Khalifa, stares at the screen with wide eyes and whispers, "I want to be like Ibrahim." Somewhere in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim walks past the marketplace. He's offered a microphone, asked to speak at a local rally, but he declines. He stops by a small radio station instead. The host, an older man who remembers his father, asks if he wants to share anything. Ibrahim records a short message. Later it plays across the country and eventually makes its way online. His voice says, "The world changes not when we speak louder, but when they stop pretending they don't hear us." There's no music, no graphics, just his voice, fading into static, and still, it reaches millions. Back in Burkina Faso, Samuel arrives discreetly in a modest car. No media coverage, no press release. He walks into his school recently rebuilt. With funds from his new foundation, the classrooms are bright, the walls painted with local art. A teacher welcomes him, expecting a speech, but he raises a hand politely and gestures to a small chair in the back. He takes a seat among the children, opens a notebook, and simply listens. One of the students glances back at him, confused but smiling. A moment later, the teacher begins reading aloud from a local author's story about dreams buried beneath red dust. The camera lingers on Samuel's face. He's not smiling, not out of sadness, but out of stillness. Something settled in him that evening. A small post surfaces from the school's official account, a blurry photo of a classroom with Samuel seated in the last row. No caption, the image itself says enough. Meanwhile, a child's drawing is pinned to a wall near the grave where Ibrahim stood earlier. It's a sketch of a radio tower beaming out waves labeled truth. Below it, the child wrote, "So they don't forget us." Another child drew a picture of Ibrahim walking beside Khalifa, both smiling, hand in hand. No grave in sight. At a university in Johannesburg, a lecture hall erupts in applause as a student reads an excerpt from a book titled Chairs Built by Chains, Essays on Global Silence. The dedication page reads, "For the boy with the twig, and for those who finally listened." As the applause fades, the professor who once dismissed student activism as naive stands and nods. Something has shifted even in him. In Paris, protesters lay vials of red soil outside the corporate headquarters of mining giants. None of them speak. They just stand in silence, holding signs with Ibrahim's quote. A security guard watching the protests later says, "I've never seen silence feel this loud." Across borders, across time zones, the world doesn't roar, it listens. Slowly, steadily, something ancient and ignored begins to rise again. And in the final scene, the narration closes not with grandeur, but with echo. A quiet voice, Ibrahim's recorded plays over footage of farmers tilling land, girls riding bikes to school, an empty chair in a studio, and a small bird flying over water. His words are simple. Sometimes truth doesn't confront, it waits to be welcomed. Fade out, the screen goes black, then a single line appears. Handwritten in the corner, he didn't raise his voice. We lowered ours to hear him.